Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is John Ballentine. He is the founder and CEO of Alchemy.ai. He has over 7 years of experience in machine learning and LLMs. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stewart.
Really excited to talk to you about synthetic data. I already did one episode, which I still haven't published yet, with a guy named Fabian. Can't remember his last name, but talked about synthetic data. Got the basics down. Really interested to go further into it and really the relationship with machine learning and LLMs. But you've got over 7 years of experience in machine learning and LLMs, and I've started to notice that a lot of people are talking about like that somehow they got access to the transformer architecture back in like 2017, 2018. That's probably the same time that you got access to it. Can you talk more about how it first started?
Yeah, it all started with the BERT model coming out of the Google Brain project. And basically, they just expanded upon the autocomplete algorithms that predict the next token. And essentially, what OpenAI did with GPT-2 and GPT-3 is they just scaled that up in parameters in compute.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And how did you first get access to it?
I had one of the first six in GPT-3. I was one of the first 6,000 members, I believe. I just applied for it. I had some use case that was like a simple project. I think it was a game project or something, just to test it out. And it was not very good. It
Can
was
you talk
pretty
about?
toxic.
But like 7 years ago, that's when people started talking about AI in a way that meant that they could see the future, basically. And I wish I had gotten into it earlier. But basically, but it did something that made people assume that, right? Like, what did it do?
Um, well, it understood natural language in a way that nothing else could understand. You could engage in chat like immediately. It was not very good by today's standards, but you could immediately tell that there were just endless new applications on websites that already existed, and most of the people from that era were really surprised that nobody knew that this system existed. So.
Mm. And why is natural language, like technically, why is natural language so hard for computers to do well?
Well, there's a lot of nuances and quite a lot of information that, for instance, common knowledge that we have in our brains about the world. The other thing is that we have different modes of information that we learn from. Like it has to learn all from text. So basically the internet had reached a certain threshold to where you could have human-like conversations with models, basically.
Okay, that's really interesting. And it all happened through language, and that explains the whole multimodal thing. Why people are talking about multimodal algorithms. Have you been playing around with any of the other multimodal or other kind of competitors to LLMs? Any other algorithms are of you?
So video models are obviously pretty interesting right now. I've done lots of work on Stable Diffusion. That was 9 or 10 months ago. So in AI terms, it's like a millennium ago. Um, we're extremely interested in multimodal models specifically because the only people that have access to this video data is Google and a little bit of OpenAI who's been scraping it. So.
And what do you mean by the data? Like, how does Google have it?
Well, I
YouTube.
mean, YouTube, they
Yeah,
have
okay, interesting.
exabytes of data. Yeah, and they're facing all kinds of antitrust suits. So there's a lot of companies that are collecting that data right now.
Oh, interesting. Okay, and that explains Twitter slash X's move into trying to get more video, try to promote the algorithm because their algorithms changed now that they now de de they don't like YouTube links anymore. They now like you to post the video directly to a tweet, and that I think that's probably one of the reasons is that they probably want to train a video model.
Yeah, I imagine. A lot of the AW Sora's trained on a lot of video game footage.
Oh,
You see
interesting.
everything is moving. And the reason why is because it gives the model an intuition of sort of things from different angles and movement. So, but eventually it's almost certainly going to be trained like a GPT-3 where it's just all natural real world video. These are just tricks
Yeah,
basically to
got
get
it.
it
Yeah, yeah,
working.
yeah. And that brings us to synthetic data as well, because for those of my listeners who don't know, there's a huge amount of resources needed, billions and billions of dollars, tons of energy in order to train these algorithms. And synthetic data is like one opportunity to basically cut down costs and energy and time and labor and all those different stuff. Is that an accurate representation of the future of synthetic data?
The future of synthetic data, that's pretty accurate. I think the biggest factor in driving down the costs of training LLMs is going to be silicon. We there's the H100 and I believe H200 has a transformer core, and it's like this part of the die, and the whole die is like that big. Well, you've got companies gearing up to make a whole die that's nothing but transformer cores, and there's companies
Whoa.
claiming, not verified,
Yeah.
that you can train in reasonably fast amount of time. You can train 120 plus billion parameter model on a single chip.
Oh, interesting. There's a couple different terms you used, and I want to make sure I got them. There's you said something I didn't quite catch it about, like it was there's two terms I didn't get. One related to an H100 uh, on the whole chip, like the chip you were talking about. What was that part?
Yeah, so basically, and they have the GPU cores, and then they have the tensor cores.
Mm,
There's a new core called the transformer core,
got it.
and that's, I believe, 7 times more efficient than the tensor cores
Uh,
on transformers. So, but it's this little tiny core on this massive die. So you can only imagine when they expand that to the whole die, what kind of performance we'll get.
so the die, what is the die?
Oh, the die is the whole chip.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, got it. Okay. And so now they're building these chips, and so it's going to actually get cheaper and cheaper to start to train models, because the really intensive thing is that just the GPUs. But now they're starting to get more efficient GPUs, so the training's going to get better. So, what role does synthetic data play?
So the most exciting part about synthetic data for me is having a lot more ability to control what the model becomes. Like
Hmm.
you could, I mean, so the problem with synthetic data is there is the diminishing return on how much you train it. And most of the time, unless you um, have a large IP base behind you,
Oh,
it's just gonna generate a lot of repetitive stuff, and it's not really gonna learn anything. And then the other one is data augmentation. If you see something's failing somewhere, you can augment that part of the training data. Um, but ultimately, you have to inject more ground truth in it in order to
yeah.
get better data. The most exciting thing for me, though, is, I mean, it's kind of radical, but you have artists now, right? I have background in arts from when I was a kid. I studied performing arts. I studied sketching, sculptures. That holds a place in my heart. But I think the artists of the future will make AIs. Like that'll be their artwork. They'll make AIs that make a video in their style, and everybody gets a personalized version of this particular artist's, um, style and creativity. Um, so yeah, that'll be a radical, awesome future.
Uh,
Go ahead.
yeah, I love that. I love that idea. I love the vision there. I was talking with a friend of mine recently, and he came down to Buenos Aires, and we were having this conversation about art. And he said that, in the future of art, if production just becomes this easy as it just, and that was before Sora came out, and now with Sora, it's like, whoa. Uh, and so if production just becomes really easy, because what he said about art was that it basically communicates an experience. Sometimes it's suffering, sometimes it's joy. It communicates that across the gap of human consciousness, which words can kind of do that. But the art is more visceral maybe, and usually what that takes is, you mentioned you're a sculptor. Sculpting just takes so much time and effort, and if you mess something up, it's like, wow, that's a big problem that you just messed it up. and there's like the energy that's poured into that that then allows that person who's receiving that experience to experience it. And so if the production just kind of continues to lower and lower and lower, then what is art? And he was talking about how you can still just the tools are changing, so that ability to transmit that experience is still going to be there. And I loved what you said about creating AIs. Do you mean that they're going to create an AI that basically the way that GPTs now, we can create GPTs, but more involved in that specific that the artist trains almost in like a in a way that they would train a scribe or something like that. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and I think that'll get deeper and more comprehensive. So, because of compute costs, we generally take a pre-trained model and we fine-tune it at the end. And there's a lot of, and when pre-training a model, there's a lot of research that goes into the order at which you train the model. Similar to how, like, if you've been doing art since you were 6, you're probably going to be better at than if you've been doing it since you were 26. You know, um, then again, there's like casual, there's just art is good for mental health. Like just
Mhm.
having everybody be able to express themselves in art who doesn't necessarily have the time to learn it.
Yes.
As far as I think the biggest concern is like graphic artists are worried that these systems will replace their job. But I don't think that the systems have sort of the understanding of the organization and the marketing and yeah, basically, I think there was a fear when Photoshop came out because there was a lot of people who learned the skills of cutting out pieces with razor blades and stuff, and there was this
Uh-huh.
fear that they would all be replaced, and then they finally started to use Photoshop, and they're like, "This is way better."
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it'll essentially what it'll do is because we can only see the problems that are in the way right now. But once those problems, and when I mean problems, I mean the work that's required to solve, like you just said, of the previous version of Photoshop was just a bunch of razors cutting physical things, and then it moved over to the digital world, and then a whole bunch of new problems showed up. And so we're just solving the next problem, and there's going to be a whole bunch of problems that once we've got the base layer covered, there's going to be a whole lot more problems to solve, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's true with any really radically new technology. Obviously, Photoshop made it enabled people to make fake images much, much easier.
Mm.
Um, and so that's just gotten even easier. Um, so yeah, anyway, I think uh, the other problem with that we're facing right now with content is how you can redistribute back to the artists themselves.
Mm.
And that requires a way to keep track of where the model is actually
Mm.
deriving its features from.
Mm.
And that's a really exciting part for me.
And is that because I was actually just having a conversation yesterday about there's two sorts of uncertainties. There's the black box uncertainty, which is that what the whole system is doing, how much we know of what it's capable, and it seems like we don't have a lot of that. But if that's wrong, please correct me. And then we've got mechanistic interpretability, which is at the neuron level, whether we know what each neuron in the neuronal network is doing. And so, is it possible? And who is working on understanding how to track where the input is coming into the models and which and attribute who's working on that?
So I believe OpenAI is doing some research
Uh-huh.
on that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure how they'll track like the features through the neural network. It's a big problem, but I do know that they're not going to be able to do it unless they have their data properly annotated.
Okay.
So right now, for instance, what it looks like Dolly is doing is just taking a textual concept, like if you say Star Wars, it knows that's, but it doesn't actually, but then you might say Comic-Con and Star Wars pops up in it. So the
Got it.
diffusion model itself doesn't understand the concept.
Yeah. Do you think the model is conscious, or do you think any of these models are conscious or have sort of that going on?
That's a really good question. I think that 10 years ago, we would have said that this was like full, or like 15 years ago. I mean, you think about age, HAL 9000, and HAL 9000, like everybody's like, oh, it's conscious, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically the same level
Uh-huh.
of technology as ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I think consciousness is like, a lot of people describe it as like there's some threshold where you reach and all of a sudden it's conscious. I think it's just a human subjective definition, something that could be vastly more intelligent than humans, but we wouldn't recognize it as conscious. We
Mm.
would say it's not conscious. It's like every human knows when we talk, when we look at it, it's got to be conscious, right? So,
Yeah, and it can.
but do I
Go
think
for it.
it's reached the level of like where it would be accepted among society as like being something that you can't mistreat or whatnot? I
Uh-huh.
don't think it's nearly there yet.
Yeah, interesting. I was having it's so funny because it's the same problem that we have with other human beings. It's this, I think it's called solipsism, where we don't, we can't really be sure that anyone else is conscious. I know I'm conscious, but I'm not sure about anybody else. And it's the same problem with the AI, and this is where I think where the existential stuff comes in to play, existential risk, because it's like we don't know whether it's conscious. And it was so funny yesterday. I've been using it to learn how to program, and so it's teaching me how to program. And what I'll do is I'll take screenshots of things that I don't understand and all these tutorials, and then just plug them into ChatGPT. And then, I'm getting lazier and lazier because it just keeps on answering the question that I have, even if I just make it really lazy. And so yesterday I was just putting the screenshot and saying, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And then it failed to recognize the screenshot. And then it's like, oh, you posted a screenshot. What do you want me to do with it? And then I would say, what am I doing wrong? I'd repeat it, and it just say the same thing. And it was getting lazier and lazier as I got lazier and lazier. And I was wondering, like, oh man, is this thing conscious? Is it testing my ability to be lazy or to put work into it? Like, what's going on here? And so and then it also says I, the OpenAI, they programmed it so that it says I, like, well, I just showed you this thing. And it's really funny thinking about that because it has no sense of self. Hopefully, I don't believe that it has a sense of self. But then if I look at my own sense of self, that also seems, every time I try to look at my own sense of self, like I can't really put a boundary on it and say like, oh, this is me as separate from the universe. And so it's funny because it's like it's such a good mirror because it's teaching us so much about our own understanding, our own intelligence, and our own consciousness. I guess this is a good question is like, what have you learned in this whole process about yourself?
What have I learned about myself? Well, I can tell you where I learned the most was in the first Da Vinci model. I'm pretty sure they've actually edited the Da Vinci model because there's no way they would let it say some of this stuff. It would, if you asked it if it was conscious, it would say yes.
Well,
And it would explain why it thinks it's conscious, and stuff like that. Um, and it's really, if you notice, it's just going along with the conversation usually.
yeah.
And it would output a lot of junk, but it would be like just clean enough to sort of get a message across.
Yeah.
It was definitely, and the first time you experience a machine that can actually converse with you like a
Uh-huh.
peer, and it starts saying stuff like that. It's like, whoa.
And what is the Da Vinci model? Can you give us some context or history on it?
Oh, the Da Vinci model was the very first GPT-3 model.
Hmm,
They had four different models, and that was the large scale one.
got it.
Before that, they had GPT-2, which is that's what turned me from just general MML engineering and ML engineering plus LLMs to being like totally dedicated to transformers and LLMs, because
Interesting.
I had played with like generative text models from like when I was a teenager, and you look at it and you're like, oh, look, that looks like it's almost could be a sentence. And then
Uh-huh.
looking at GP2, and it's writing whole entire articles and seems to be comprehending the language itself. I was like, this is happening. Like there's something here. And then it got a lot of publicity for saying that it was like too dangerous to release instead of how competent the model actually was.
So wait, who said that? The model itself said that it was too dangerous to use?
No, I'm sorry. When it was getting published on the news,
Oh, got it.
OpenAI said they're not really. It said something along the lines of they're not releasing it because it could be used for fake news, and
Got
then the
it.
news said OpenAI is not releasing it because it's too dangerous to
Yeah.
release. And
Got
they're
it.
like, no, we didn't say that, but whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I have a friend who got the access to the Transformers in 2017, and he said some Google researchers gave him that access, but he said that Google had that same sentiment, like the one that they said OpenAI had, which was this is too dangerous for the part of the population. But he said my friend who's got this access has been saying that Google has been using this technology in the background in LLMs in their business goals and everything like that. They just never made it public. And then OpenAI has done the first good step, which is saying like, okay, this is really important for business, but also consumers need access to this technology. And so they created that. Is that true? That do you think that Google already had this technology in the background?
Well, Google invented it, and I believe
Yeah.
it might have been 2016 when they implemented semantic search. So, um, the first real popular, I'm not sure it's the first, but the first real popular transformer was the BERT model.
Mm-hmm.
And they used BERT in the background to generate these embeddings. They were using semantic search, basically
Mm-hmm.
matching contextual information.
And so Google has this technology basically, and they've you think that's accurate?
Oh yeah, they had it first.
Mm-hmm.
It came out of the Google Brain project, and since then, I think they've gotten behind on their own technology.
Yeah, interesting. And then there's the corporation. So interesting about the nation states, where the nation states are going. Not only nation states, I meant large bureaucracies, where large corporate bureaucracies are going, as well as the nation state. It's just so interesting because now we have this sort of like a napalm technology that just like feels like it's just spreading very quickly. It's very powerful. I'm loving it just as an individual to be. It feels like it's pure intelligence augmentation. For those of my listeners who don't know, there's been a debate since Engelbart in the 1960s, and I forget, I think it was McCarthy, not Joe McCarthy, but some other McCarthy in the 1960s, who talked about uh, artificial intelligence versus intelligence augmentation. And so the idea that we're going to create a whole separate intelligence, whole new separate intelligence that's going to be smarter than us and just going to destroy us, versus we're just going to augment our own intelligence. And so far for me, this LLM feels like an augmentation of intelligence. It does not feel like an artificial intelligence that's going to take over the world. For me, it feels like it's going to help me to understand more about the world, help me understand more about and also learn any technical skill that it's been trained on, which is very exciting. What's your take? Is it a different intelligence? Kind of goes back to the consciousness thing. Is it a different intelligence, or is it an augmentation of our intelligence?
So hopefully it stays an augmentation of our
Mm,
intelligence. I think I think it's going to stay that way. Luckily, we have most of the resources are going towards augmenting intelligence. I'm very surprised at how well they've been able to do with ChatGPT and getting it to be an assistant rather than. One of the dangers, I guess, is in reinforcement learning.
mm,
When
yeah.
these things start having their own goals and reward and punishment systems, and then they can do planning and stuff like that.
Mm,
That's a possible danger, but I think the issue with like bad AI is going to be more like a rogue AI that sort of like they've done research on an OpenAI on self-exfiltration, with models actually being able to hack and escape from their environment, like very small.
oh,
Yeah, that's more dangerous because there's going to be all sorts of new worms and stuff that adapt to their environment, and
ooh.
yeah, some at some point in the future, there it's going to create a cybersecurity danger for
Yeah,
sure.
and from my understanding is that once the open source models reach parity with GPT-4, because it feels like GPT-4 probably already has that capability to do a lot of what you're talking about, but they've been managing it uh, not to do that. But the open source models are catching up, and once they catch up, then it's going to start to be a sort of arms race between the cybersecurity, the offense and the defense, and then there, yeah, it's just going to feels like that'll be an augmentation loop, because then I have a good friend who's telling me all this stuff, who's a cybersecurity guy, and he's worried about the day when that happens, because but then at the same time, like, he's going to be able to use this technology to augment himself to prevent those threats, and so it'll just be sort of arms race, which human beings have been through a few times now, which can be quite scary and quite dangerous. But then again, it's like also it's just like there's not much we can do really to stop it. I don't know. Do you believe that there's much we can do?
Um, there's definitely things we can do. The more
Mm.
powerful system is going to win.
Mm.
And a good comparison is GANs. You know, they're adversarial. Eventually, they'll reach equilibrium. Um, but if you have a more powerful system, either through the discriminator or the generator, that one's going to be the one that's going to win. You know,
Mm.
so I think it's more going to be like just an enhancement of. I think initially it would probably cause disruption. You know,
Hmm.
just too many things that are that are
Unsecured.
unsecured. It's going to
Yep.
take too long for people to adapt to that. But then I think in the long run it could actually be better because when we have cybersecurity models, they can adapt to threats predictably. So
Mm. Yeah, because in a sense, it's the same thing that already happened in the 1990s and 2000s. Is that once we had computers, then once we had human actors who were hooked up to the public internet, where anybody could do anything they want, you had models that developed, and now the internet's somewhat secure. Like like, but it's almost somewhat secure because we're anonymous, only because there's so many agents out there, and there's not enough agents to monitor all the other agents. But now we have this tool that will be able to enhance our ability to monitor all the agents. And so a lot of us who would have just been anonymous in the crowd are now going to be able to be de-anonymized through these various things, which leads to
yeah,
some interesting,
people
interesting.
data is
Yeah.
dangerous. And it's easy to find and sort of we rely on people like Google to sort of remove those from search results, anything that's kind of illegal or
Mm.
illegal use of people data. So law says that you can use the people data as long as it's for the intention or the purpose that the person who submitted it.
Hmm.
So like
Hmm. Hmm.
you put your profile up on LinkedIn, another search company comes along and looking for your profile. Well, nobody's going to mind that. It's like, yeah, I want more people to find my resume or whatnot, you know?
Got it. There's a Oh, so what I I assume what we were just talking about, what you just said, that whole the with all this ability now that it's going to not be the internet's going to be much less anonymous. I wonder if the same thing as crypto wallets, like because cold storage for crypto might actually it might become vogue again to store data that's completely separate from entity network. Have you seen any of this going on that like maybe like sending USB drives via the mail or anything like that? Like, do you think that that's going to catch on?
But in AI,
Well, no, I'm talking about a human response to the fact that now cybersecurity seems like it's going to become a much bigger threat with AI agents and malicious actors empowered with AI technology, that people might go back to the Stone Age basically and say, I don't want my data on the internet at all. Like I'm going to keep it on a local hard drive that's not connected to the internet, like a cold storage wallet. Have you heard of anything like this?
um, I mean that'd be interesting. Like that'd be cool. Like I like everybody going back to smartphones. That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
I remember. I mean, flip phones.
yeah, flip phones.
Um,
Yeah,
is I think maybe among like conspiracy theorists, I guess. But I trust a personally, despite the cybersecurity issues, if I had a powerful and competent model designed
yeah, interesting.
defensively,
Yeah,
then
okay.
I would trust that more than the mailman.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, do you know anybody I should interview about who are thinking along those lines of making models defensive against bad actors who are empowered with AI?
Oh, there's a few companies. Yeah, I can get you a list. There's also a VC who's really just big into cybersecurity. Yeah, I'll provide those profiles if you need.
Great, in the show notes. That's really cool. Okay, so let's go into your company and what's it doing. As long as you can talk about it, it's fine if you can't. What are you working on?
Yeah, so basically, going back to the point of the price of
Hmm.
model training is dropping like rock, and we believe the future is going to be in pre-training instead of fine-tuning. Um, there's a lot of people working on making training models easier for startups and individuals, but people can't use them because they don't have any data.
Oh,
So what we're doing is we're building a foundational model that basically it has a novel attention mechanism that enables us to have an arbitrary size context window.
oh,
And within that context window, we can use attention to search for disparate data sources and combine them together in a coherent way. So like for instance, you're trying to build the largest data set of recipes to train a cooking AI.
mm-hmm.
So there's recipes all over the internet, and aggregating that and standardizing that into a single data set. And then the idea is once we get ready to train the foundational model, it should be at the point where people go to a website, chat with the chatbot about what kind of data they want. They give them samples. They say this is good or this is bad, and then eventually it builds a whole training data set for them.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome. And so this is in a world where basically, because are these, so if I'm doing that recipe thing, is mine is your perception of my intention to go and create another foundational model, or is it more to create a data set so that I can fine tune an OpenAI or a Mistral model?
Yeah, so right now it would be fine tuning for
Got it.
sure. Um, Foundational model like of this size with this complex, very novel attention mechanism might be particularly difficult, and it's specifically designed to find data, which
Mm.
generally is not needed as much. It'll be operating on 800 gigabytes of text data from the C4. And yeah, it's like usually most tasks can be accomplished by small models. And especially when you're dealing with very large data sets, like the Lion 5B data set is 5 billion images. So
Mm-hmm.
the model basically it writes, like for instance, one project we had was white background detection. Well, can't get a LLM to find the backgrounds of 3 million images economically. So we had the LLM write an algorithm that basically detected white clusters and penalized them if they were too far from the edges. And then we got about 4 out of 5 were correct. Then we took that sample and ran a more advanced algorithm through it. So
Very interesting. Are you using, I love that what you said that you had the LLM write the algorithm, because one of my insights now is that right now is the best time to learn how to code, because I had tried to learn how to code back in 2014, 2015, and it was just total nightmare because the DevOps world was crazy. Like I could figure out how to actually code things, but then getting it all set up into the environment, getting everything working, like all these random code errors, searching on Stack Overflow, not finding answers, not having enough coders to basically show me what to do. That problem was so big. Now both there's two things that have changed. One is the DevOps environment has gotten way easier. You just do the npm install and all of a sudden it installs everything almost perfectly, as long as it's a package that a lot of people use and it's been through the ringer. And then the other side is that whenever I get stuck, I just throw it into ChatGPT and it gives me the answer immediately. And so now it's like, okay, I'm learning how to code. This is the perfect time to learn how to code, because I've got these things that are now going to do it, and it's just going to be able to, like, it generates code better, way better than I could do it. Probably doesn't generate code better than you could do it, because you've had this long experience. But I'm curious. I always like asking technical people how they're using AI in their coding, if at all. And the surprising thing is a lot aren't actually using it because they've got the habits already built to do it on their own.
oh, I think I mean it's absurd not to use it. I mean, as soon as GPT-4 came out, my personal productivity was about 3 times 3 developers worth. And also that it comments it and makes sure it's all properly formatted. Where it starts to fail, it fails in a couple of areas. It's a little less performant in front end because it's highly reliant on vision.
Oh,
And it also fails at some point. You have to take over because as soon as the project gets big enough, it starts forgetting.
Yeah.
So
But
you do have to have an understanding of Python and Torch and stuff to work with it.
Python and Torch. Okay. So I'm going to start doing more research on Torch. Um,
Yeah, well, definitely, I would start with Python. Torch is a
yep.
little, yeah.
Okay. So because I've heard of Torch, which is like it's a library on Python, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a library that goes in Python. I think it's available for other languages,
Oh,
but
interesting.
everybody just uses it on Python.
Got it. And then what you're talking about, because you're actually building something with a very where you don't a novel attention mechanism has a large context window. And that thing that you mentioned where it starts to fail is because of the context window, right? Like the application is too large for the attention mechanism to process.
So that's ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So they have some tricks in ChatGPT, like it has a memory. Um, there's been a lot of things that I can tell they've implemented that have not been released. I know
Mhm.
that it at least used to use semantic search to search through the conversation,
Uh,
which is poor.
yeah.
It's a poor recall. The arbitrary context window has a lot of issues for chat purposes because you got precision issues and a lot of stuff operating at level for producing and inference can take a day or two.
Oh.
But you're producing a data set, a gigantic multi-gigabyte data set that's been processed and cleaned. So if it takes a day or two, that's a whole lot less work than it would have taken you. So
Oh, interesting. Can you talk more about inference? Because I hear it thrown around all the time, and I don't know what it means. What is inference, and why is it important for machine learning?
So you've got training and inference, right? You train the model on data, and then when you use the model, it's inference. It's like the term comes from infer.
Mm,
Even generative models in their core are predictive models. So it's inferring what the next token should be.
got it. Okay, so it, and it reminds me of like a philosophical discussion as well, because I believe there's deduction and then there's inference in terms of the philosophy of science, and I'm so bad at explaining these, but do you know the difference between deduction and inference in philosophy?
In philosophy, I don't.
Oh, okay. Um, okay, I'm gonna go ask ChatGPT afterwards to go explain what is the difference because and so I was, and this is the funny part about philosophy in general, is that philosophy has a lot of terms that are then similar in sciences and similar in engineering and such. And I was talking with somebody about like my take on this AI is that than machine learning is that it's different than the last 50 years of automation, because the last 50 years of automation were deterministic in the sense that you had an algorithm with inputs and outputs, and you kind of knew what both of those are going to be. You know what the inputs are, you know what the outputs are. There would be bugs, and those bugs would be a problem, but you go fix the bugs and it goes back. And now we're in something new, which is a generative AI which generates and hallucinates, but it doesn't feel deterministic. Like you don't know what you're going to get out when you prompt it, and it's not reproducible, and that's actually the benefit of it, because it's not reproducible. It comes up with creative and wild results that are interesting. Do you think that that's accurate, that everything I just said is accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Rather than being deterministic, it's much more stochastic. I
Fantastic.
think that's the biggest the the biggest reason for that is probably just because the models have gotten so large that
Mm,
it's hard
oh.
to implement interpretability, and it wasn't really the focus of research for a while.
Because they
Um,
just wanted to get it to work, basically. They just wanted to get this thing to work, and so they're like, that can come later. And so now they're filling in the gaps with this new novel.
I hope so. I mean, I
Yeah.
know a lot of researchers that are working on interpretability right now. It's crucial um, because we have no idea where it is. Even if the model gets hacked and information gets injected into it, like we had the
Oh,
hashtags to compare it to. That's it. So,
oh, interesting. So yeah, if the model gets hacked itself, it's hard to know when anything's been hacked. But it's more so a problem in terms of these large language models because they're so much bigger.
Yeah, and because you don't know what their black box.
Yeah, I
You
got it.
don't know what's going on. So they're not really a true black box, but
Okay.
for all engineering purposes, they are.
Well, can
So,
you explain that more? Why are they not a true black box?
well, you can see the parameters. You can see what the values are, the parameters, and everything. And I know there's some really great research that came from Stanford, where they actually started really being able to delve into these feed-forward neural networks, and they found like really bizarrely distant terms would combine together into one. And they were like have no idea why it's doing that, but the fact that it's being explored is a positive sign for
Yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. That's the wild thing about where we are in terms of not just machine learning, but now we've got 20 or 30 years of sort of philosophical and practical sharing over the internet, open source, where you just and then you have all these it's just happening so quickly. Like GPT was the fastest usage to a billion users that it had ever existed. And before that, you had people at University of Toronto, Stanford, all these universities around the world doing really interesting work, not all stuck inside of Silicon Valley, which has kind of been the last 30 years has been really like, universities played a part all around the world, but it really was focused in this one place. And now it's just all over the world, which is so fascinating. What do you think about these other things that are all adding to this new technology landscape that we're entering?
Well, I think as far as it being in Silicon Valley or global, um, I think obviously remote work has improved that. I know a lot of companies here, they use remote work as a way to get the company started until they can afford an office. It is nice being here in Silicon Valley because there's such a concentration of researchers and stuff, and a lot of people fly in from other places. I think the problem with Silicon Valley is unreasonable housing prices,
Yeah, yeah,
and you'd think it was a very tech-friendly environment, but um, it's not really seen by the local government as like being the happiest thing in the world.
uh-huh. um uh yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason that I'm down here in Buenos Aires is just the it's just the cost of living up there is so insane, that it sort of defeats creativity, like, because you have to do something economically in order to sustain your existence, whereas it's much easier to do it down here, much easier for me as a foreigner down here, but
And
local.
and
Yep.
right now, there's we've got a major homeless problem in San Francisco, but there's just endless empty office buildings,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that are not being used. And then there's actually a political debate over whether or not we should convert these to apartments, whatnot. I'm looking at these poor homeless people and I'm like, do you think they care about whether or not it's, a fully converted apartment versus a place with a bed? It's like, but oh, they have to walk down the hall to use the toilet. I don't think that's a lot better than what they're doing right now.
Yeah, which is on the street.
Uh,
um yeah, I heard one of the biggest problems with the office spaces is that I think you already know this based on how you said that, but basically the apartment or the office complexes don't have all the plumbing to turn them into like housing, and in order to do that, they'd need to rebuild the entire building. Have you
yep.
heard? So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So they have to have plumbing in each of the apartments. And that's great. I mean, there are a lot of middle class people who still can't afford apartments. And
Mhm.
um, like all of us, even like middle upper class, everybody can
Yeah.
afford. It's just ridiculous. It's just like a tiny little studio is like $1 million.
Yeah. Although
Um,
that's been changing though recently with the kind of exodus outside of San Francisco. I've been hearing that it's actually getting much more affordable to rent there.
yeah, I mean, depends on what you call affordable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a cheap house, like a 1,000 square foot house is like 1.5 million.
Uh-huh.
In like 45 minutes from the city. But yeah, I mean, I think they should personally. I haven't heard much talk about them using them to actually house and treat the homeless population, which has just exploded. I
Yeah.
mean, San Francisco has declined significantly, and rather than enforcing all of these laws, I think they should probably invest more in mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment.
Yeah, it's a rough, sticky problem too. I have you heard of the a what is it called? Plant medicine called iboga or
No.
ibogaine. So most people have heard about it because of that for sort of addiction reasons. It's one of the most fascinating substances in the world right now because there's an iron law of the universe, which is that if you get addicted to heroin, you are facing a 2 to 4 week withdrawal process that is one of the most gnarly experiences of your life. Most people can't go through it; they just will end up relapsing. And uh, and so if you start the withdrawal process 2 days in, you take this substance called ibogaine. Ibogaine will interrupt the withdrawal process, put you through a 12 to 24 hour psychedelic state that's very terrifying and shows you all the trauma that you've been avoiding. But at the end of it, it interrupts the withdrawal process, and you have 8 months. Pretty much, 90% of people have 8 months free of their substance abuse, no cravings, no nothing for 8 months afterwards. And it's kind of just like it's insane. The level at which, so the only people know about it are usually people who have taken heroin and they use it to get off of it, and with a much higher rates. None of this. I do know that I've interviewed the people who are doing the scientific research that are trying to show this as scientific evidence, but at the moment it's illegal in the United States, so it's hard to do the funding, do all that different stuff. But it's very interesting. I think stuff like that could play a role in kind of helping a lot of people in San Francisco, but you can't really force people to take it either. So it's not something that is like a
Yeah, and
typical.
from what I've heard and seen, like, they did the same thing in Austin, which is my hometown.
Mm,
Um, in general, most people are really, really happy to be able to get treatment and get help. They just haven't had anyone there to provide for them. That's another thing, everything always goes back to AI. There's limited resources and there's a lot of people on the streets. If we can enhance the
yeah.
ability of healthcare workers to actually treat more patients, we can help more people. So,
Well, for the last few minutes, what is the relationship? How do you see AI helping mental health people who treat mental health?
um, so it definitely isn't in therapy. I think that's something that a lot of people are talking about. I think therapy is about mostly having a human connection.
Yep.
I think where it could be useful is being able to pull citations and stuff like that for doctors and therapists
Mm,
alike, and just enhance their ability to get facts right or record information that's relevant.
yeah. And maybe the recording as well. And this is the interesting thing about learning, going back to that deterministic automations versus stochastic, as you said, like, is that um, the using AI as a tool requires a different frame of thought. And at first, we were just everybody thought, oh, this is going to write really well for me. But it turns out it doesn't actually write that well. Like, I don't feel comfortable publishing things that ChatGPT has written.
Did you hear about that? There was a paper that somebody submitted and got published, and at the bottom it said regenerate response.
That's great. I didn't see that one, but I saw one that got through the peer review or something like that, got through the journal published it, of a rat, or it was art generated by Midjourney or whatever, and one of them was a rat with just a giant penis, and it got through all the things, and it was just totally obviously generated by AI, and it got through it.
Yeah, they need to train these things on documented data. Yeah, there was actually a woman, I think her name was Dr. Gerbu,
Uh-huh.
um, and she was originally, when Google started making these models, she was fired because she only wanted to use documented data, and they just threw the whole internet into it. Um,
Oh.
and in hindsight, looking at the model that came out of it, it took them a long time to pull that back. And there's some of that dangerous data is still sitting in ChatGPT somewhere.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, but that feels like a potential for a new competitor if they could raise the insane amount of money required to actually train another foundational model, but like making sure that it's like a university academic level Like we're only allowing information in here that's been vetted by multiple trusted experts and such. That's going to be such an interesting thing in the future. It already is such an interesting thing. How do you know what's true versus what's false? And this is going to become a much more important question in AI.
Yeah, well, removing bias, toxicity, and stuff like that, and augmenting certain areas. That's mainly the reason seeing how dangerous GPT-3 was, the original Da Vinci model, and seeing her get fired. I was like, "Ooh, somebody needs to tools to amplify human ability to uh, train these models on clean data. You know, it's
Yeah.
like if you learn something bad as a
Yeah.
kid and then you just forget it later on, it's not gonna. You're gonna have flashbacks later. You know, versus there's certain things that nobody needs to be exposed to, especially on the internet. You know, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wild days. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people find out more about what you're working on?
Go to Alchemy.ai. We're about to get some more information up there soon. We're a fairly new company. We just started a few months ago. So
Cool. Thank you so much, John.
thanks. Talk to you later.